Welcome everyone to part 8 of my complete Blender beginner tutorial series. In this part we're going to be UV unwrapping a few of our different objects and then adding textures onto them. So there are a bunch of different places online where you can download textures. There are a lot of free textures that you can get on some texture websites, and you can also purchase some texture packs online, and there also are some websites where you get a subscription and you pay monthly and you can download their textures. Now you may remember in an earlier part of this tutorial series, I introduced you to this really awesome website called HDRI Haven, and this is a super awesome website where you can download free HDRIs to light your scenes. So when it comes to textures, there are a lot of free websites where you can download textures. So my top 3 favorite texture websites to download textures from are Texture Haven, CC0 Textures, and CG Bookcase. And I'll leave links in the video description if you'd like to check out these awesome websites. And what I really like about all 3 of these websites is they're very high quality textures. So if I just click on this texture here, these have up to 4K, which is really nice. And usually you don't need more than 4K. And you can see here on Texture Haven, this one even goes up to 8K, and a lot of the textures on CC0 Textures go up to 8K as well. Usually I use only up to 4K, but it's really awesome that they have textures that are that high quality. What's really awesome about all these websites as well is that all of the textures are free and licensed as Creative Commons 0. So on HDRI Haven, all of the HDRIs are licensed as Creative Commons 0. Also on Texture Haven, all the textures are Creative Commons 0. And also on CC0 Textures, it's kind of in the name, but if you scroll right down, right here, all of the textures are CC0. And then also on CG Bookcase, if you go to the license information, they're all licensed as CC0. And what's also really awesome about these texture websites is they're seamless and tieable, so you can scale them up and you're not going to see seams in the textures. If you'd like to support these creators, they do all have Patreon pages, so you can see on CG Bookcase, become a Patreon, you can click on that if you're interested. And on CC0 Textures, if you scroll down here, they do have a Patreon, this will take you to their Patreon if you're interested in that. And then also on Texture Haven, if you scroll down here, you can become a Patreon, and on HDRI Haven, right down here, they also have a Patreon if you're interested. I like to give these websites a shout out because I use their textures in lots of my tutorials and artwork, and they're really high quality. So for this tutorial, we're going to be using the Roofing Tile 002 on CC0 Textures. I'll leave a link in the description. And for this tutorial, I'm just going to be downloading the 2K JPEG because we don't really need more quality than that. 2K JPEG will be fine. And also again on CC0 Textures, I'm going to be using the Concrete 020. And again, I'm just going to download the 2K JPEG. That'll work fine for what we're doing. And then I'm also going to be using this free cube image right here on Pixabay, and I'm going to be using this on the flag in our final animation. So links will be in the description if you'd like to download the same ones that I'm using. So this cube right here, of course, you can use any texture that you want if you want to use a different image on your flag, and then also the concrete texture for the road, and then the roofing tiles for the top of the house. But of course, you can search for other textures on these websites, or if you have some other textures, then you can go ahead and download them. So once you download those 2 textures, if I just go into this folder, you're going to get a zip file. So what you need to do is right click on the zip file and then go down here and click on extract here. And I'm using Linux, so your operating system is probably different than mine, but even on Windows or Mac, you should just be able to right click on it and then extract the zip file. So when you extract the zip file, you're going to get a folder, and then when you go into that folder, you're going to have all of the different maps. So this one is the roughness, this one is the normal, and this one is the color. And those 3 are the only ones that we're going to be using. Now, sometimes when you download textures online, they come with other maps. So this one comes with a displacement, but we're not going to be using the displacement. That's a little bit more advanced. And for most things that you're going to be doing, you're not really going to be using a displacement texture. And then if I go out here and go over to the concrete, this one as well has a displacement. But again, we're not going to be using that because for most things that you do in Blender, you don't really need to use displacement. So the important things are the color, the normal, and the roughness. Now before we add our textures into our material, we're going to need to UV unwrap the mesh, and that way Blender will know where to put the texture onto our object. So what I'll do is go back to the layout here, and just to show you, you can follow along with this, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a cube. And I'm just going to press G and move this up, and let me just turn on my screencast keys, and that way you can see what buttons I'm pressing right down there in the corner. Alright, I'm going to press the /, and I talked about this earlier, but that will go into local view, and basically what that's doing is it's just hiding everything else so that we can just preview this. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to be doing this to show you a little bit easier. So now that I have this cube selected, I'm actually going to go back to the shading tab, and I need to press period to zoom into this and / to go into local view. So if you want to, you can follow along with this, or you can just watch. I'm basically just going to show you how you would UV unwrap an object, and I'm going to show you with a cube because that's a pretty good example object. So I'm just going to add a new material, and you can see that there is the principled BSDF. That's really great. That's the shader that we're going to use. And over here on my other monitor, I have the texture that I'm going to be using. So what I can do is I can actually drag in the texture from my file browser and drop it into Blender. Now there is another way to add in textures. What you can do instead is press Shift A and click on the search and search for an image texture. Click on that and add it in, and then you need to click on Open, and that'll bring up a file browser, and you just need to locate to where the texture is, and then I'm just going to double click on it to open it. Now I already have it down here, so I'm just going to select this and press X, and that'll delete the node. Now I'm going to click on this node, just bring it up here. So right now the cube is just using this base color, which is this white material. But what I want to do is tell it to use the texture for the color. So what I do is you take this color here and you put the color into the base color. And now it's telling it to use that texture instead of a color. And you can see that now the texture is placed on our cube. Now it already looks pretty good, but that's because on default, the cube is already UV unwrapped, but I'm going to show you how to UV unwrap the cube if it wasn't unwrapped. So to UV unwrap this, I'm going to go over to the UV editing. So when I go over to UV editing, you can see that there's this here, and this is the UV editor, and then here is our cube right over here. So if you press 3 to go to the face select and then select these faces, you can see that when you select these faces right over here, it's going to show you the UV layout of the faces. So the UV layout that's over here is representing the mesh that's over here. And when you select something, it's going to select it. And then when you deselect it, it'll deselect it in the UV layout. Now I'm also going to press T and T to close these panels because I don't need them. Now, if you don't see this texture here, what you need to do is click up here and then click on the texture. It added the texture in automatically because I already added the texture onto the material. So how you UV unwrap an object is you tab into edit mode and then you select everything that you want to UV unwrap. So I want to UV unwrap everything. So I'm going to press A to select everything, and then you press U. And so when you press U, it brings up the UV options right here. Now the main one that you're going to be using is this unwrap, but there's also some different things here, and you may use these different options depending on what your object is. So if I just click on unwrap, you can see that nothing is going to change, and that's because the default cube in Blender has automatically been UV unwrapped. But let's just say I'm going to press 7 to go to top view, and then I'll press U and unwrap project from view. What this is going to do is it's going to just unwrap it straight down because we're looking right on top of it. So whatever your view is, it's going to unwrap it onto the cube. So project from view, and you can see now that because we're looking down on it on front view, all of this mesh here, it's just squashed it down and flattened it out onto this texture. So if I press Z and move my mouse down to go to the material preview and tab back into object mode, you can see that now the texture is looking okay up here, but down here it's all stretched. So if I tab in edit mode now and press U, maybe move over here, press U, project from view, you can see now it actually kind of looks like a cube. That's because we've UV unwrapped it from the view. So it might look good right here, but you can see over here there's a lot of stretching. So this is why you have to properly UV unwrap your object, because if you don't properly UV unwrap it, then your textures are going to look all stretched. You can see now if I press U and just use the normal unwrap, it doesn't really know what to do, so it doesn't actually do anything. It just keeps the previous unwrap because you're not really telling it anything other than just to unwrap. So for something like a plane, it's pretty easy because what you do is just add a plane, and then I would press 7 for top view, and I could just press U and then project from view, or I could just select everything and press U and unwrap, and because there's only one face, it just knows to stick it on just like that. And then if I select this cube and just drop it onto this plane here, you can see that that looks correct. But for more complex objects like these 3D objects, what you have to do is you have to add seams and then tell it to UV unwrap it. And the best way to imagine this is to imagine this cube right here being a paper cube, and what you want to do is you want to take scissors and cut out the cube and then lay it down on a flat table. Because this object right here is a 3D object, it's in 3D space, but this texture here, this is 2D. And so you need to UV unwrap the mesh flat and open it up, and that way Blender will know where to put the texture onto your object. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's cut out this cube. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. And remember, on default, when you add a cube, it's unwrapped properly, but I'm going to show you how to do it manually, because maybe when you're modeling furniture or you're modeling some different objects, you're going to want to UV unwrap it. So it is really important that you understand the basics of UV unwrapping so that when you're working with other objects, you'll be able to do it. So what I'm going to do is press 1, and that will go to the vertex select. So remember, we want to imagine this cube as a paper cube, and we're taking scissors and cutting it out and opening up the paper flat on the table. So what I want to do is cut right here and cut around here. And if we cut that, then this could open up. Now it's actually not going to be cut open and opened up, but that's a good way to imagine it. So for this, I actually need to press 2 to go to the edge select. You don't always have to use the edge select to UV unwrap, but in this case we need to because we want to select these edges here, but not this edge. And if we're in the vertex select and I select these, you can see that when I select these, it's also going to select the one in here. But if I cut all of these out, this would be like a little piece of paper that would be cut out and it would kind of come up and out. But I want this piece of paper to be connected to the rest of the cube. So I'm going to press 2 to go to the edge select, and I'm going to select this edge and then hold down the shift key and select these two edges. Now to cut them out with scissors, what you need to do is right click if you're using the left click select. I'm using the right click select, so remember I press the W key and that'll bring up this menu. Then what you do is you go down here and you can see there is mark seam and clear seam. So this is basically what I was talking about, cutting out the object with scissors. We want to mark a seam. So click on that, and now you can see whatever was selected is red. But don't worry, when you go into rendered mode, you're not going to see that red. It's just a preview in edit mode so you can know what you've UV unwrapped. So now you can imagine that this right here would open up. So it's kind of like a box with a lid, and now it's opening up. So now if I select everything and press U and click on unwrap, you can see that it's still really messed up. If I go down into the material preview, you can see this is all stretched. It's really weird. This is all messed up, but the top here, it looks okay because we've cut this out, and you can see this top here. If I press 3 to go to the face select and select this, you can see here's the top and it's been rotated up, but the rest of it is still all jumbled around because Blender doesn't really know what to do with the rest of the mesh. So we need to keep doing this, but we are on the right track. So if I press 2 to go back to the edge select, I can select this one and this one. Now you can right click if you're using left click select and press W if you're using the right click select, but another shortcut key to get to this is to press Control E, and Control E will also bring up the menu and you can click on mark seam. Now another way to do this is to press U, and U is going to bring up the UV mapping settings. And what's nice about this is that there's the other UV unwrap settings and it's just right here. And with Control E, there's all these settings right down here, whereas when you press U, there's only a few settings. So really you can get to these options however you want. And then you just need to click on mark seam. Now, if for some reason you wanted to get rid of this, you can click on the clear seam with that selected and that'll clear that. But let's press U and then click on mark seam again. And now I'm going to select everything and then press U and click on unwrap. And if I do that, now you can see it's a little bit better. But you can see there's still some things messed up, but it is looking a little bit better. You can see that this Blender really doesn't know what to do with the rest of this, but it's able to cut this out and open it up. So if you can imagine it, basically this piece coming down would be opened up and kind of be flat right out here. So now we just have this piece. So what we need to do is press 2 again, and I'm going to select this edge and then hold down the shift key and select this edge. Then I'll press Control E or U and then click on mark seam. Now I can select everything and press U, and one more time click on unwrap, and there we go. Now everything is nice and flat, and you can see that if I press 3 to go to face select, these faces, they're all exactly the same size, and you can see that these are also the same size, because before they were kind of different sizes, and so the texture was being stretched and pulled, but now you can see that looks proper. And you could imagine if this were paper and you cut it out and you put it on a table, that's probably what it would look like, depending on how you cut it out, of course. So now you can see that the texture looks really good from all sides. Now the thing about UV unwrapping is that where you cut it, there's going to be seams, because you can see like here to here, this would kind of fold up and connect to up here, because if this cube was kind of folding up, this side would connect to this side. But because we cut it out and opened it up, you can see that this texture doesn't really connect because it just cuts off there because we added that cut. But right here, you can see the texture is seamless and goes along the object. So when you're UV unwrapping, what you're trying to do is UV unwrap it properly, but you want to show as few seams as possible. So if you're making furniture or something, what you'd want to do is maybe make the seams on the bottom, kind of on the back, so that it's harder to see the seams. But on the front of the texture where you can see it, you don't want the seams to be seen if possible. So if I press 1 to go to the vertex select, you can see that this is the one that we didn't cut, so this is opening up flat. So if I just hold down the shift key and select these vertices, you can see that these are connecting next to each other and the texture rolls over, and that looks really good. You can see that tile there, it connects, whereas over here there's a seam because, for instance, right down here, this texture doesn't really match up. You can see that that doesn't match up and this doesn't match up at all, and that doesn't match up as well. So hopefully that was a good explanation of the fundamentals of UV unwrapping. And so hopefully in the future now, because you understand the concept of it, you'll be able to UV unwrap your objects a little bit better. All right, so I'm just going to select this cube and delete it. And we're going to go back to the layout here. And then I need to press the / to go back out of local view so that we can see all the objects. So I'm going to press Z and move my mouse down. So we're going to be adding a texture onto the flag, a texture onto the road, and then a texture onto the roof. Now these are all pretty easy to UV unwrap, so let's do the roof first. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to press 3 for the face select and just select the 2 top parts because I don't really want to show the tiles right here and down at the bottom. I only want to have the tiles right here, so we're just going to UV unwrap this top area. And then what we'll do so that you can't see the tiles on the rest of it is we will duplicate the material and then take away the texture, and that way this part of the mesh won't have the texture on it. So just select these 2 top areas, and I'm going to go over to the UV editing, and that way we can preview the UV mapping. And I'm still in local mode here, so I need to / to get out of that. Then I'll press period on the number pad to zoom over to the object. So this object is so simple that we actually don't need to add any seams, so you can just press U and then click on unwrap, and you can see there's the house, and that looks really good. If I press Z and move my mouse down, it'll go into the material preview, and we can't see the texture, and that's because we haven't added the texture onto the material. So let's click over on the shading tab, and I'm going to bring this up. And here is the principled BSDF, so that is the shader, and you can see that right now it just has this gray base color. So again, what I need to do is drag and drop the color right into here. You can also press Shift A, as I talked about earlier, and add an image and then open up the image. So what I'm going to do is drag this over here, and the color, I want to put the color into the base color, and that way it'll tell it to use the texture data instead of using just the color. And now if I go back to the UV editing, you can see that it's added the texture onto the roof. And it looks really good. I don't see any stretching because this is a pretty simple object to UV unwrap. Now there are a couple of problems here. One thing is that the texture is way too big. Like if you imagine how big a person was compared to the tile, these tiles would be like really big. And so I want to make the tiles a lot smaller. So to do this, I'm going to tab into edit mode, and we can actually edit where the UV map is. So if I just select one of these vertices, again, these vertices over here represent the vertices that are in the mesh. So if I press G to grab, you can see that I can move this, and it's actually moving with the texture. Now, if you don't want to see the selection here, what you can do is scroll over with your mouse up here, and then you can click on this button, and that'll take away the preview of the selection, but it's still selected, you just can't see it. And that way we can preview the object better. So you can see that I can move this, and it's messing things up. What you can do in the UV editing is you can select everything by pressing A, just like in the 3D view, and then you can press R to rotate, G to grab, or S to scale, just like if you were scaling, rotating, or moving an object. So what I can do is just scale this up. So I'm going to just press A to select this and press S to scale, and just scale it up to a size that you like. And these textures are super awesome because they are tileable. So if you were just taking a normal picture of tiles, like if you took a picture with a camera of tiles and then you added the image in, it wouldn't be seamless and tileable. You have to use like a 2D program to make it seamless and tileable, but you can see these textures, they're really high quality, and so they're already seamless. So if I scale this up bigger than the size of the texture, it's still going to look really good. Because basically the bottom of the texture here matches up exactly with the top of the texture, and the same here. So the left side of the texture is matching up exactly with the right side of the texture. And the creators of these textures did that deliberately. So I can just scale this up, and I can just scale this up to an infinite amount, and it's going to tile. Now, if you scale it up really big, you can actually see that, like it kind of looks similar, but of course that's way too big. I don't need to scale it up that large. So just scale it up to a size that you like. Now, because this is a stylized scene, I don't want to scale it to scale. I want to make it a little bit bigger. So I'll leave the tiles at about something like that, and that looks good. Now, one more thing, you can see that these tiles are going down. They're pointed down, they're rotating this way, but these ones over here, they're rotating up like this. So what I want to do is rotate this texture over so that it's pointed down. So to do this, I'll tab into edit mode, and you can see that we can't see the selection, so I'll just click on this to get rid of that. Just select this, and then you can see that because I selected it over here, it's going to be selected over here. So now I want to rotate it halfway around so that it's pointed down. So what you do is you press R to rotate, type in 180 for 180 degrees, and then click on enter. And now if I tab back into object mode, you can see that now this is going down this way, and this is going down this way. Now if you zoom in here, you can see that it's gotten messed up. These seams aren't really correct, and there's not really much that we can do about this, but it looks okay because there is kind of a sharp edge there in the roof, so it does look okay. But if you want to match these up, what you can do is tab into edit mode, and then press G, and then click with your middle mouse wheel, and bring this over, and you can just align that up as best as you can, and now you can see that does look a little bit better. You can see a little bit of the other tile though, so I'm going to tab into edit mode again, press G to grab, and click and hold with my middle mouse wheel. Just bring that down a little bit, just like that. Go back into object mode, and now you can see those tiles match up a lot better. So there we go. If that looks pretty good to you, then we can just go back to the shading tab. Now, if I press Z and move my mouse up to go into rendered view, if I just zoom in here, you can see that this kind of looks just like a flat picture. You can see it's almost kind of shiny. It doesn't really have any roughness data or normal data because it's just an image that you've placed on the object. So what we can do is we can add in those two other maps. We can add the normal and the roughness, and that'll give it more data of what the actual material is like. So the normal is going to add bump, so it's going to add like little bumps and crevices in our tiles right here, and then the roughness is also going to make the tiles more shiny and more rough depending on the area. So I'm just going to go back into the material preview. So what I can do, just like this texture right here, is I can drag and drop the maps in. So first I'll do the roughness, drop this in, and what you could also do is select this, press Shift D, and that'll duplicate it. Oh, Shift D. Bring it down, and then what you could do is you could click on the file browser and then just go to where the texture is and double click on it to open it. But I'm just going to drag it in, so that's fine. So if I just bring this up so we can see it a little bit better, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the roughness, you can see this is roughness, I'm going to put this roughness underneath the color. So what I need to do, you may have already guessed this, you plug the color into the roughness. So on default, there's just a value here. And what that does is if I just go into rendered mode, if I turn it down, everything's going to be super shiny. You can see now that looks like a mirror right there. And then if you turn it up, everything's going to be super rough. But the roughness map is black and white, and it can actually tell it where it's going to be more rough and where it's going to be more shiny on the texture. Now, before we continue, I want to introduce you to the Node Wrangler add-on. So the Node Wrangler add-on is super awesome, and it's built into Blender, so you don't need to install anything. What you do to enable it is go Edit, and go to the preferences, and you can see there's the add-ons right here. Now on the search right here, you can start typing in Node, and if you type in Node, you can see there is the Node Wrangler add-on. So I love this add-on, I use it all the time, so I check mark it, and then I click on Save Preferences so that it's in all of my future Blender projects. So I'm just going to close this now. So the Node Wrangler is really great because it can help you to see what different parts of your material look like. So how to use the Node Wrangler add-on is you hold down the Control and Shift key, and then you click on this texture. So just click on it, and you can see what it does is it adds this viewer node, and then the viewer node is going to plug into whatever you clicked on, and it'll just preview what that is seeing. So normally on the principled here, it's, calculating all the light paths and everything, and the light coming down in the scene. But if I hold down the Control and Shift key and click on this, it's only going to preview that texture. So it's kind of like an emission, just shining that texture out, and you can just preview it if you want to see what it looks like. So you could also Control Shift and click on the roughness, and you can see here is the roughness map. And so when the texture is darker, it's going to be more shiny, and then where the texture is white, it's going to be more rough. So now what I can do is plug the color up to the roughness, and then I need to Control Shift and click back on the principled. So hold down the Control and Shift key and then click on the principled, and that way it'll just go back to the material. And you can see that now it's doing something, but it looks really weird. It looks super shiny, and that's not really what we want. And why this is happening is because we need to change this color space. So when you're using the color map, when you want the color to contribute to the actual material, this color space option, you need to keep this turned on to sRGB, and that's red, green, and blue. RGB is red, green, blue. But any other texture, so the roughness, the normal, and any other texture that you're using that doesn't contribute to the color of the material, you need to click on this and change it to non-color. And now when you do this, it's gonna look correct. So you can see that looks a lot better now. It is somewhat shiny, but it's not super shiny. You can see the reflection of the bricks there just a little bit. So if you have this set to sRGB, there's gonna be problems with it, but if you set it to non-color data, that's going to fix those issues. But again, if it's a color, it needs to be sRGB, because if you turn this to non-color, it's going to be really weird and it's going to get rid of the color and that'll have problems. So just turn this back to sRGB. So the material is looking a lot more realistic now, but you can see that it's still really flat, and so we want to give it the normal map to make it more bumpy. And I do apologize if the screen recording is lagging a little bit. When I'm rendering with my GPU, sometimes the screen recording software will lag a little bit. So now let's add that last texture, which is the normal. So again, I'm going to drag it and drop it in from my file browser. You could also just duplicate the color and then click on the little file icon and select it. So I'm going to bring this right down here, and you can see this says normal. What I want to do is the color, I want to plug it into the normal. So if I do that, you can see it does look different, but something is definitely wrong with this because it's all black here and there's these little black areas and it doesn't look very good. Why this is happening is because of two reasons. One thing is that the color space here, as I talked about, this needs to be non-color, and that does help a little bit, but we also need to convert this to normal data that the principled BSDF can use. So these image textures here, you can see on this color here, it's yellow, but the normal over here, this is purple. So what the purple is telling you is that this is working with the normal, but then this is working with color. So what we have to do is we have to convert this color here to the normal. So the colors here, they're really just a representation to let you know what they're working with. So the yellow here is color and the normal is the normal map. So to convert this, we need to add a node right in here. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to search for a normal map node. Click on this and then drop it right in here. And you can see that the color is yellow and it goes into the color, which is yellow. And then the normal, this is purple and it goes into the purple. So this normal map node converts the data. If I Control Shift and click on this normal, you can see it. And it's this purpley blue texture. It converts this data. If I now Control Shift on the normal map, it converts that data to data that the normal can use on the principled BSDF. So that's what it looks like. And then if I Control Shift and click on the principled now, you can see that it actually looks kind of 3D and it looks a lot more realistic. It actually looks like there's little dips here and little bumps here, and it looks a lot better. Now you may have noticed on the normal map here that there is a strength. Now if I Control Shift and click on the normal map and then zoom in here, you can see that if I turn the strength up, it's going to make it more rough and more bumpy. But I wouldn't really recommend turning it any more than 1. Usually you just turn it down if you want to make it less bumpy, but if you turn it up, you can sometimes have issues. Sometimes I'll turn it up a little bit, but usually I'd recommend just leaving it at 1 or turning it down if you want it to be less bumpy. So I'm just going to hold down the Control and Shift key and click back on the principled. So let me just go back to the layout here. So that looks really good now, but you can see that this is all stretched, and that's because we didn't properly UV unwrap it, but I don't want to show the tiles here on the side and the bottom. So what I'm going to do is tab into edit mode, and I'm going to select this and then Shift select this. Then I can press Control I, and what Control I does is it inverts the selection. So now instead of selecting the tile part, I'm selecting all the other parts. So what I want to do now is make that part be a different material so that it doesn't have the tile texture. So to do this, you click over on the materials panel and then click on the plus right here to add a new material in the material slot. Then you click on new, and I can just call this roof 2, just roof 2. And then with this selected and with the roof 2 selected, you click on assign, and that will assign the material to the part that you have selected. Now it's just white right now, so the base color, you can just turn it down to a gray, maybe just slightly blue. And now if I just go into rendered mode, you can see that looks pretty nice. I think I'll make this base color a little bit darker so that it matches a little bit better. And then maybe just turn the roughness up because I don't want it to be very shiny. I want it to be pretty rough, so I'll just turn that up to maybe about a 0.7. All right, there we go. So we have finished the texturing for this. Let's just press Ctrl S to save this, or just go File and Save. And now let's do the concrete material right here. So this is really easy to UV unwrap because it's pretty flat. So I'll just select this, tab into edit mode, press 7 to go to top view. And it doesn't really matter where you are as long as you are on the top looking down on it. So just press U, and what I want to do is project from view. So I'm going to UV unwrap it from the top. So if you imagine this being the concrete texture, we're just pushing it right on and flattening it. So project from view, that'll just put the texture right on the top there. So I'm going to tab back into object mode. So what we need to do is, again, add the texture maps onto the material. So I'll click over here on the shading tab, and let's do this again. So what I'll do again is just grab the image texture from my file browser, just drop it in here, and then we'll plug the color up to the base color. And then if I move over here, you can see it. That looks pretty good, but we can play around with the scale. So now what I'll do is drag and drop the normal in right here, put it down here, and then drag and drop the roughness right down here. And then remember that the color space for these two need to be set to non-color. So this one again, non-color, because this one is the only one that's contributing to the color. So this one just needs to be set to sRGB. Okay, the roughness, plug this into the roughness here, and then the color right here on the normal needs to go into the normal. And then again, we need to press Shift A, search for a normal map, and drop it right in there. So what I've shown you right here is the basic setup for most materials. Now there is actually a quicker way to do this, and it's actually using a feature with that Node Wrangler add-on. So what I'll do is just click on these and press X to delete them. What you can do is select the principled BSDF and then press Ctrl-Shift-T. And when you press Ctrl-Shift-T, it's going to bring up your file browser. And then what you do is you go to the textures and you click on the color, hold down the Control key, and click on the normal and roughness. And that way it's going to select all three of them. And this won't work if they're not named properly, but in this case, they are named correctly because they have the normal, roughness, and color. So because of how these are named, the add-on will be able to set this up properly. So what you do now is you click on Principled Texture Setup. And what it will do is it will automatically set up the material so it does all the work for us. And it also did add this mapping and texture coordinate, and I didn't really talk about this, but don't worry about this. This actually really isn't affecting anything. You can just press X to delete it. Basically what it's telling it to do is to use the UV, but we already UV unwrapped this, and on default it uses the UV, so you can just delete those and it'll work fine without those mapping and texture coordinate nodes. So this is really fast and it does help you to speed up your workflow, but if you're a beginner, then I would highly recommend that you actually memorize how to set up a material properly. I think it's really good for you to remember the color space and the non-color data and using the normal map and all that, because when you're creating your own materials with Blender's nodes, knowing this stuff will really help. And also, if you want to go ahead and edit the texture or edit the material, you can actually do things to edit the material. Then you'll have knowledge of how it works, so you'll be able to edit the material properly. And then you may have noticed that it adds this little frame here, and you can click and drag to move this around. Basically what it does is just adds this frame, and it puts all the textures in the frame, but you can just select the frame and delete it. If you press Shift A and search here for a frame, there is a frame there, and you can like drag and drop nodes into it, but I don't usually use them. All right, so now that that is done, this road does look pretty good. But I'm going to go over here to the UV editing and just double tap A to make sure this is all selected, and then press A to make sure this is selected. And you can see that it has the roofing tiles in the background. What I want to do is click on this and then just find the concrete color, and now it's in the background. And what you can do is zoom in here and press S to scale and just scale this up, and then tab into object mode just to see how that looks, and just scale it up to a size that you like. Okay, how's that? Let me go into rendered mode and just preview this. Okay, that looks really good. Now it is way too bright right now, and so we can actually edit the material to make it darker. So let's go back to the shading tab. And then right here on the base color, if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see here is the color data for the texture. Now in between this color and the base color, we can actually add some nodes in here to edit the colors. So to do this, you press Shift A, and there are a lot of ones here. You can search for them, like for instance, color. What I'm going to do is just search for the Rgb Curves. So click on the Rgb Curves, and you can move it over here and let go when it makes this wire right here light up. So just click on it and it'll add it in. And then I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift key and click on the Rgb Curves, and that'll preview what it's doing. And everything looks the same right now. But what we need to do is click on the C right here and drag this down. And what that'll do is it'll make the texture darker. So now when this RGB Curves goes through here and then goes into the base color, if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see that now the texture is a lot darker. So if I go into rendered mode now, so now you can just change that to what you like and change around the colors, and it'll look different in that finished material. All right, so that is done now. I'm going to go back to the layout. So all we need to do is the flag here. So I'm just going to select the flag and then press period on the number pad to zoom into it. So what I want to do is just, again, UV unwrap this straight through because it's pretty flat. So I'm just going to press 1 to go to front view, tab into edit mode, press A to select the entire thing, and then I'll just zoom in here and press U and unwrap, again, project from view because it's flat. We can just UV unwrap that straight on there. Okay, let's go to the shading tab now, and you can see that we have added a flag material. I'm just going to, in the camera view, just press Control B and box select the flag, and then go into rendered mode so we can see what it's looking like. You could also just press Z and go into the material preview. I think I'll do that instead. So now we can go ahead and add in that texture that we downloaded. Now you could use whatever texture you want. If you want to have a picture here or something, you could add in whatever image you want. But what I'm going to do is drag in the block image and just put it right here. And then I'm just going to plug the color up to the base color. Now we don't have any normal map or roughness map, but that's totally okay. It'll look fine for what we're doing. So you can see that it's way too big. So what we need to do is scale up the UV editing. So click over on the UV editing, press A to select this whole thing. And right now it's showing the concrete. So if you click on this, the drop down here is the block. You can also search for it by typing in block and then click on it. Now we need to scale this up because you can see it's way too small. So press S to scale and scale that up, and then just scale it up however big you want. And then if you press Z and move your mouse down, that'll go into the material preview and you can preview what that's looking like. Now, right now it's tiling the material, and that was good for the texture because we wanted the texture to be tiled, but we don't want this to be tiled. Now, there's a really easy way to fix that, so don't worry about that. Just imagine this and just get it to the size that you want. So something like that is really good. Okay, let's go back to the shading tab now. Now to make it not tile, what we can do is right here on repeat. Repeat is good for most things, but I don't want this texture to be repeated. So I'm gonna click on clip. And now you can see it just has the cube in the center there. Now the texture here is black all around, and that's because our image texture had a transparency. You can see here it had an alpha transparency. So what we can do to fix this is press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a mix. So add the mix, and we're going to add the mix RGB, not the mix shader, the mix RGB, because we're mixing colors. The mix shader is when you want to mix two different shaders together, like the principled or the glass or the emission. I want to mix colors together, so I'm going to add the mix RGB and just drop it right down here. Then what I want to do is see this alpha here. If I Control Shift and click on this and then Control Shift and click on it again, you can see that there actually is the transparent data because this image here has the transparency. So Blender actually detects that transparency. So we can actually use this to tell it where it's going to be a background color and where it's going to be the image. So the alpha here, you're going to plug this into the factor. And what the factor does is it's telling it where it's going to be one color and where it's going to be another color. So if you don't have this plugged in, let me just unplug all this stuff and Control Shift click on the mix. And then these colors here, I'm just going to change this one to blue and then click on this one and change this one to red. So the mix here, the mix is going to tell it how much it's going to be blue and how much it's going to be red. So there's blue and there's red. If I turn this all the way down, it's going to be all blue. And if I turn this all the way up to 1, it's going to be all red. And if it's in the middle, it's going to mix between them. So this color here, the image, I want to put that into color 1, and then the bottom color, that's going to be whatever the background is going to be. So I want to make that just a bright blue color. Now you can see it looks okay, but it actually is kind of transparent and it's mixing them together. So the alpha here, if I Control Shift and click on this twice, it has black and white. So the black is where it's transparent and the white is where it's the color. So if you plug the color up to the factor, it's actually telling it that the black is going to be one color and then the white is going to be the other color. So if I Control Shift and click on the mix now, you can see it looks a little weird, and that's because I actually need to plug this color to the bottom one. And then you can see that now the white from the alpha is going to be the cube image, and then the color 2, that's going to be wherever it was black. So I can just change this to a blue color, whatever you want to do, and then I can Control Shift and click on the principled, and now it has the cube with the blue in the background. So that's going to be it for this part of the tutorial series. So in the next part, we're going to be modeling some low poly grass and some low poly rocks, and then we're going to be using Blender's particle system to put the grass and the rocks on the ground. So join me in the next part. It's going to be right up on the screen, somewhere over there. You can just click on the link when it's released. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next part.